Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather on the 24th day of January 2022. I'm David Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service. I'll be hosting today's show. First graphic up, as usual, hazardous weather graphic showing a big red area there over the western interior central Seward Peninsula. Noatak Valley, Kobuk Valley, again, just like yesterday, down into the Yukon Delta there. Mid and lower Yukon River Valley area. That's for winter storm warning out for the, let's see, for tonight until 6 a.m. Tuesday morning for an additional 4 to 6 inches of snow. Some areas could see an additional 9 inches. And so the areas that are seeing rain today actually changing over to snow currently, and probably will pick up anywhere from 4 to 6 inches possibly. Then starting to taper off later on, especially tomorrow morning. Otherwise, up on the eastern Arctic coast, blizzard warning out for that area for Tuesday and Tuesday night, and that's for winds expected as low tracks eastward. A pretty strong trough moves along with it, expecting west winds to kick up in gusts to 65 miles per hour. Kaktovik, Barter Island area, resulting in heavy drifting and blowing snow. Whiteout conditions, of course, go along with that. Remainder of the Arctic coast under the influence of a winter weather advisory for, again, for tonight through Tuesday night into early Wednesday for snow and blowing snow, 40 to 50 mile an hour winds with visibilities at times less than half a mile. And then also for the eastern North Slope and eastern Brooks Range, same thing, winter weather advisory for Tuesday night into early Wednesday for snow and blowing snow. And then for the Alaska Range there, high wind warning continues out for, let's see, tonight until 6 a.m. Tuesday morning for high wind warning for the Alaska Range for continued possible gusts to 80 miles per hour. And from there, finally to, speaking of wind gusts, strongest winds occurred earlier, actually last night, and early this morning over the western Alaska Range on down to the Aleutian Range. Farewell had the strongest wind gusts, 95 miles per hour, while PFA FF Mine down in the Aleutian Range, they're about, I believe, 2,100 feet in elevation. They had peak wind gusts 83 miles per hour. Colville, down in that area too, 65 mile per hour wind gusts. And again, Sparavon, western Alaska Range there, 71 miles an hour. So that's where the strongest winds occurred. A little farther to the west than what I thought yesterday. I thought they'd be more into the Chugach Mountains, south central Alaska area, but winds did gust anywhere from 40 to 60 miles an hour in those areas. And looking at satellite imagery, you can low tracking north and northeastward. Kind of hard to pick the center out here in the cloud pattern, but the front a little more evident, breaking up as it moves north, as it usually does with the mountainous terrain breaking up the cloud features. But pretty obvious there into just west of Dawson, extending down, something of a wave developing and moving northward as it shifts into the panhandle with some rainfall amounts, heaviest on the eastern North Gulf Coast in the last 12 hours. And then lighter back to the west. And out west, a distinct lack of storminess over the Bering Sea. You can see some westerly flow there pulling colder air in, and snow showers, Pribilofs, but not so much. Not a bad day down over the Aleutians. Looked like a fair amount of clearing possible, some scattered snow shower activity. A little more extensive though on the Alaska Peninsula and a little bit into Bristol Bay there, but starting to dry out over the southwest interior, although Bethel picked up some snow during the day today. Rainfall amounts back over to the eastern North Gulf Coast. Heaviest reported 1.23 inches at Yakutat. And you can see that front much more impressive early on, weakening as it moves eastward and definitely just breaking apart as it pulls up into the interior. Seward picked up just under an inch of rain the last 12 hours at 0.93 inches. Otherwise, a lot of moisture getting up into the northwest interior there. Kotzebue picked up anywhere from 4 to 6 inches of snow today, and other areas around Buckland over to Selawik on up to the Noatak Valley, anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of snow falling there. And lighter amounts back down to the south, and actually some rain up into the lower Yukon River Valley area today. But that'll be changing over to snow as colder air is pulling westward or eastward from the west, And as you can see, kind of a mixed precipitation pattern all the way up into the Lotto Hills today, with snow and increasing northerly winds there, pulling cold air back southward from the southwest coast back up to the northwest coast. And it's pretty windy. Winds coming down though, seeing gusts 40 to 50 miles an hour still mid-afternoon today over the western interior there, but less gradient and still breezy south central Alaska up into the Copper River Basin, of course the Alaska Range. 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts report Delta Junction, and then the rain heaviest there around the eastern North Gulf Coast, rain spreading into the Panhandle. And looking at the forecast for tonight, low tracking eastward in the Arctic coast, and a couple of troughs swinging down out of the northwest from the Arctic Ocean there north of the Russian Far East brings snow and blowing snow, gusty winds 25 to 45 miles an hour, and that'll kick right into the central interior with snow showers. Snowfall levels lowering south central Alaska, so we'll lose the 40s and drop into the lower 30s with rain and snow to start, or rain to start with some rain and snow showers later on, but precipitation amounts don't look to be too heavy, at least at this point in time. Some areas might pick up some new snow by tomorrow morning in south central Alaska, especially higher elevations, Kenai Peninsula. Rain and snow showers into the Panhandle, starting to clear out over Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay. You can see some weak ridging tonight with a weak low west-northwest of the Pribilofs. Tomorrow that develops into a high center, so it'll be colder, drier, with a lot less wind over Bristol Bay and the western interior there. Still a lot of wind up over the north slope from the Brooks Range on out to the Arctic coast there. Strongest winds on the eastern Arctic coast, again with a blizzard warning, gusts 65 miles an hour out of the west. Rain and snow showers for the North Gulf Coast. Snow showers slowly diminishing, kind of lingering into the afternoon, northern Cook Inlet, Madawaska-Susitna Valley, up into maybe the Fairbanks area, but mounts won't be heavy at all. High pressure, eastern Aleutians, central Aleutians, light winds, mostly dry, isolated snow showers over the Bering Sea, but partly sunny, the Alaska Peninsula. Next big storm out to the southwest there, intense front pushes in, brings storm force winds into the western Aleutians during the day on Wednesday, spreading good gales into Adak with rain, and eventually into Atka, probably not until Wednesday evening there, but the eastern Bering Sea back into that northeast flow, so colder air coming into the Bering Sea for dry conditions, and over the interior looking really nice, colder and drier with less wind. Even on the Arctic coast, winds coming down considerably from what they'll be tomorrow, but still a little gusty on the east side there, but not too bad. And then a trough swinging westward there on the north side of that next system, well south of Kodiak Island, brings a chance of moisture into the Kenai Peninsula coastal areas, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, maybe some snow showers into the Copper River Basin. But whatever does fall will be quite light. Even looks like a dry day for the Panhandle with variably cloudy skies and maybe some sunshine. Lows tonight down that way, mid to upper 30s for the Panhandle, back down into the 20s, lower 30s, south central Alaska, Copper River Basin, Kodiak Island. Single numbers showing up around Dillingham, 5 to 10 for the Kuskokwim Valley, to single numbers 0 to 5 above out to the southwest coast, and then 5 to 15 below St. Lawrence Island, Seward Peninsula, western Arctic coast, mid-20s for the Pribilofs, upper 20s for the central Aleutians. Highs for tomorrow, 15 to 25 for the eastern interior, and anywhere from 5 below St. Lawrence Island, western Seward Peninsula, to 10 below, say, for Shishmaref, to maybe 5 to 15 above over the west side, and upper teens, lower 20s, Bristol Bay, lower to mid-30s, south central Alaska, mid to upper 30s, Prince William Sound, the Seward area. Another day in the 40s for the Panhandle, mid to upper 30s for the Aleutians, and then colder temperatures, as promised, Wednesday, back below zero into the Tanana Valley, single numbers, Susitna Valley, Copper River Basin, 5 to 15 for south central Alaska, and mid-20s to upper 30s for the Panhandle, mid-20s Kodiak Island, and 30 to 35 for the Aleutians, followed by highs in the 20s, southern Alaska, and still in the lower 40s for the southern Panhandle, with highs right around zero in the Tanana Valley, a little above, say 5 above and to the east of there, and then 5 below back to the west, and farther below zero over the Noatak Valley, Kobuk Valley areas, and the western Arctic coast, western North Slope, with single numbers for the highs over the Kuskokwim Delta, Kuskokwim Valley area, 15 to 20 for Bristol Bay, lower to mid-30s for the Alaska Peninsula. Out in the Aleutians, trying to push 40 for Adak and Atka, better chance there for Shimei, and mid-20s for the Pribilofs, And only upper 30s for the highs for the northern southeast coast. Copper River Basin right around 20, but Valdez should push up to near freezing. Otherwise, even Homer looking at highs in the mid-20s, about 35 for Kodiak.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Weather, we've got marginal VFR eastern Arctic coast and IFR central and western Arctic coast down across the North Slope, western Brooks Range into the northwest coast, Kotzebue Sound, northern Seward Peninsula eastward, Kobuk, Koyukuk Valley along the southern slopes of the Brooks Range. And a little bit of improvement if you head south there, but a lot of marginal VFR, scattered IFR. And then IFR, south side of the Alaska Range, down across the Talkeetnas, eastern Susitna Valley, Matanuska Valley, Prince William Sound, all the way down along the North Gulf Coast, Panhandle to Dixon Entrance, becoming VFR, high pressure builds in over the southwest interior, and VFR to start for St. Lawrence Island. Not too bad out in the Bering Sea and the Aleutians with marginal VFR and some VFR. And for the afternoon, eastern Bering Sea, northern and eastern Bering Sea, mostly VFR, marginal VFR, Pribilofs, Adak, Atka, westward to Shimian-Attu, Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, right up across south central Alaska into the central interior, mostly VFR. Lingering marginal VFR from all the White Mountains there down across the eastern Alaska Range, Copper River Basin, eastern North Gulf Coast, marginal VFR, western Panhandle, IFR, east side. And VFR holds Kodiak Island right up across Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, Matanuska, Susitna Valley for the morning Wednesday. Marginal VFR, Prince William Sound, Copper River Basin, a band Bristol Bay right up across the Kuskokwim Valley and across the mid-Yukon River, all the way up to the Arctic coast. Some IFR there, northern slopes of the eastern Brooks Range, central interior some IFR, western Alaska Range just a little bit of IFR, mostly IFR for the Panhandle. And marginal for the central southern Bering Sea, Aleutians from Unamak Island westward to Kiska, marginal, Shimian-Attu, IFR. And Wednesday afternoon, marginal VFR for the most of the Bering Sea, eastern Bering, pretty good, a lot of VFR from St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait, all the way down to Bristol Bay, some marginal VFR there, Alaska Peninsula to the Pribilofs. A VFR afternoon coming up for the Fox Islands, and some marginal VFR for Kodiak Island, Prince William Sound, and eastern North Gulf Coast. Panhandle, not too bad, marginal VFR with some VFR over toward the border. Interior Alaska, mostly VFR, just some areas of marginal VFR, eastern North Slope, and the narrow band there from Fairbanks area down across the west central Copper River Basin. Anatuvik, IFR at times tomorrow. Same forecast for Adigan, occasional IFR. Lake Clark and Merrill becoming VFR, same forecast for rainy. Could be a little lower in the morning, but VFR most of the late morning through the afternoon. VFR for windy. Isabel, marginal VFR to VFR. Probably hold mostly marginal there throughout the day for Mentasta, either approach. Tanita looking good, VFR flying there. Portage, lowest conditions early on, becoming VFR, probably by at least, hopefully late afternoon. And for Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels at the surface still back north of the Pribilofs and cutting across the Aleutian Range there. The northward along the Alaska Range, looks like at the surface north of the Susitna Valley and through the Copper River Basin, 2,000 to 6,000 feet across the Panhandle. Icing, band of light to isolated moderate rime or mixed icing from the southeast interior down into Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, North Gulf Coast, into the Panhandle, and less significant icing threat up over the Brooks Range to the North Slope and Arctic coast, and some scattered areas, Seward Peninsula, Yukon Delta, Nunivak Island, maybe the Pribilofs, and then some heavier icing out there staying southwest of the western Aleutians. And for the jet stream, 105 knots, well south of the Gulf of Alaska there, and about 80 to 85 eastern North Gulf Coast into the Panhandle. Westerlies at about 80 knots over the Aleutians. And looking at 9,000 feet, westerly west-northwest flow coming across the northern central Bering Sea into the southwest coast, turns southwest there, with upper level low over the Seward Peninsula. And 45 to 50 knot winds there out of the west along the Yukon River Valley all the way to Eagle, and west 40 to 45 knots there across the Gulf. Much lighter winds at 3,000 feet, maybe 40 knotters there over the southwest interior and up over the Yukon Flats. Turbulence, not too bad. Some moderate chop moving into the western Aleutians along the southwest coast and up over the Yukon Flats and the central Brooks Range. And after the break, I'll be back to look at the marine forecasts.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined again by Eric Stevens of GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Eric, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And we've been talking about the complex gathering of information from satellites, looking down on the surface of the planet, and some of those orbits around the planet work for Alaska and some of them don't. There's a lot of challenges with those. How can we get better imagery for the poles and specifically for Alaska?
Right. Well, today we're going to talk about a very interesting kind of satellite orbit that has potential to be real helpful for the high latitudes.
Okay.
Especially us here in Alaska. Canadians, Russians, Norwegians will all be interested in this. The satellites are not in orbit yet. Now the future is uncertain, but it's possible, and if this happens, it will be wonderful for Alaska. Okay. It's called the highly elliptical orbit.
Oh, that sounds
it's interesting. Yeah. And I think first, to help our discussion, we should get back to some of Kepler's laws and how do satellites work.
Sure.
Kepler's first law, an orbit of a planet around a sun or a weather satellite around the Earth is not necessarily a circle, it's an ellipse.
Okay.
And the highly elliptical orbit takes advantage of this aspect. We're going to put the Earth in one of the ellipse and then stretch one of the foci of the ellipse and then stretch that ellipse out real far to make it highly elliptical.
The foci is that bend part of the end of the ellipse. If you're going to stretch out a rubber band, that would be the center, kind of the stretchy part.
Yes.
Ends. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then Kepler's second law says that the closer something is to the thing that it's orbiting, the faster it goes.
Okay.
We see this in the solar system, that Mercury flies around the sun real fast. Jupiter, much slower. Jupiter's further away, it's slower. Mercury's closer in, it's faster. This happens with weather satellites too. Even satellites like the International Space Station, it's pretty close to the Earth. It goes around the Earth in only 90 minutes. That thing is moving. It's only 250 miles away. So how can we take advantage of these two aspects of Kepler's laws of motion to get better weather surveillance of Alaska? And this highly elliptical orbit is going to be the approach. So we have with us today our friendly planet Earth and our simulated satellite, the lid off of this salt shaker
like
here.
Sputnik there. Yeah.
There it is. It's shiny, it's metal, it's space worthy. And what we want to be able to do is, could you have a satellite hover over the top of the world, up over Alaska? You can't really do that. Geostationary satellites have to be over the equator. Okay. So how could we almost solve this? And this is the tricky part. Maybe should we tilt the Earth over?
Focus on the pole. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, right?
So here we have the northern side of the planet, and we're going to trace out the orbit of a satellite with this salt shaker lid here. Now imagine a highly elliptical orbit. So let's put the Earth in one of the foci of the ellipse, and we'll have an imaginary foci out here. So the satellite will not go in a circle around the Earth, but will be in this long strung out ellipse. So the satellite will go...
kind of like a racetrack.
Yes, there you go, like a racetrack. So it's an oval elliptical shape like that. And notice now that when the satellite's over here, we've got a nice view of the northern hemisphere around. There's Alaska, Russia, Canada, Greenland, all there. So that's the ellipse aspect of an orbit, Kepler's first law. The second law saying that when you're further away as a satellite, you go slower. And this we can take real advantage of. Because the way this orbit works, when the satellite goes over Antarctica here, it's going to be close to the Earth. It's going to be moving, whoosh, goes on by. And then as it comes out here, it will slow down. This increases what is known as the dwell time. The satellite will just hang here looking for hours at Alaska and the high Arctic. And then eventually it will come around and it will accelerate and whiz around the South Pole and then come back and hang here for a while because it's further away from the planet. It goes slower. It has to. That's the laws of motion. And such like that, repeating.
Wow.
Now The real important way to make this work is you have to have two satellites. So that while one is whipping around the pole, you've got the other one out here, and they work as a team. You could then get a series of images of Alaska that can be almost from a constant frame of reference, and you can loop them together to make movies. You can take a picture every 10 minutes, say, of Alaska, and then loop it, playing it at several frames a second. You could see the clouds whiz on by. You know, the Weather Channel, weather broadcasters in the lower 48 especially can show these movie loops from the geostationary satellites. In Alaska, we've never really been able to do that very well, especially in the higher, most northern parts of the state, because those geostationary satellites are over the equator. It's not a good view. And this highly elliptical orbit whipping around the South Pole and then dwelling up here would be a way for us to get that constant frame of reference and do really good weather surveillance over the Arctic, seeing where those storms are, where they're going. Nothing quite like a movie loop of the weather in time to really illustrate what's important, what's going on.
And compared to what we have right now, we just have small windows or snapshots of what's going on with the polar orbiters. We don't have that long range view that's looking top down to give us that complete motion picture that helps us understand so much of the atmosphere at this
There's
point.
so many different kinds of satellites. Each has their advantage. Each is important, and the highly elliptical orbit satellite will also fit into that scheme. It's a nifty idea to solve an Alaskan challenge.
That's fantastic. Well, that sounds really exciting. And again, kind of a satellite dream of the future to come. Okay, very good. Thanks for joining us today, Eric. We really appreciate the information. And if you'd like to learn more about what Eric does at GINA, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we invite you to visit the web address that you see on your screen there. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at the marine forecast here. Coastal waters, south coast of the Panhandle. West winds 10 to 15 knots, and for the north coast, southwest winds 15 knots, and seas running near or a little under 12 feet. Small craft advisories for the northern inner channels, where winds will be predominantly south at 25 knots with 4-foot seas. Stevens Passage, southeast at 20 knots, seas 4 feet, and Clarence Strait, southeast winds 15 knots with 7-foot seas. And then the outlook for the day on Wednesday, a little bit of an increase in the winds along the coastline there. For the south coast, south winds 20 to 25 knots, seas at about 10 feet, and then small craft advisories on the north coast, southeasterlies increasing to 30 knots and seas around 11 feet. Variable to northwest winds for the northern inner channels at about 10 knots with 3-foot seas. Stevens Passage southeast at 15 with 3-foot seas, and Clarence Strait southeast winds 20 knots, seas building to 7 feet. Prince William Sound, look for south wind at 20 knots tomorrow with 4-foot seas. Small craft advisories for the North Gulf Coast for west-southwest winds at 25 knots. And for Kamishak Bay, Barren Islands, winds will be out of the west at 30 knots. And small craft advisories for southern Cook Inlet, west winds 25 knots with 8-foot seas. North of the Forelands, though, lighter winds from the southwest at about 15 knots. Those will swing around to light northerlies for northern Cook Inlet on Wednesday. And small craft advisories continue south of the Forelands. North winds 25 knots and north 30 knots for Kamishak Bay. Northeast winds 30 knots for the Barren Islands and the North Gulf Coast. East-northeast winds 25 knots. Prince William Sound, northeast wind 20 knots, seas 4 feet. Kodiak Island for Tuesday, west winds 20 knots. And Alaska Peninsula, Pacific side, variable winds at 10 knots. Bering Sea side, 15 out of the west. And Bristol Bay, southeast winds at 10 knots. Outlook for Wednesday, gale warnings there for Kodiak Island, north winds 30 to 35 knots, and gale force winds from Sitkinak to Castle Cape at 40 knots from the north. Castle Cape to Cape Sarachev, south side of the Alaska Peninsula, north winds at 35 knots. Otherwise, lighter winds on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, northeast at 20. North winds 20 knots, seas 3 feet for Bristol Bay. On Alaska Island, variable to northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. Umack Island, light variable winds at 10 knots, seas 6 to 7 feet. Only 20-knot winds in the forecast for Adak and Atka from the south and southeast. And then small craft advisories for Amchitka Island, southeast 30 knots. Gale warnings for the western Aleutians, southeast at about 35 knots. Those pick up with that intense front pushing up toward the western Aleutians. Southeast 50-knot winds. Seas building to 30 feet for the area from Shimia to Kiskin, 27 feet for Amchitka Island. Winds southeast increasing 40 to 45 knots, especially for AKwx, and then later on for ATCA. Unmac Island, east winds 30 knots, and Unalaska Island looking at northeasterlies at 25 knots. Light winds for the Pribilofs tomorrow, comparatively, west at 20 knots, south 20 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, light variable winds at 10 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island, looking at north winds at 15 knots. Gale warnings for the northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island, or St. Matthew Island area, northeast 35 knots, so it's still only 15 knots for St. Lawrence Island out of the north, southwest coast, north to northeast, 15 to 20 knots. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, pretty windy on the east side there. Good gales, 45 knots out of the west and 30-knot brisk wind advisory winds for the central and east side. Brisk wind advisories, west winds 25 knots, western Arctic coast, Cape Beaufort to Wales, west winds at 20. And then lighter winds from Wales to Cape Thompson, south at 10, Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, southwest 15. Those pick up to 20 knots there for the western Arctic coast. Brisk wind advisories for the central and eastern coast, where winds will be west 25 to 30 knots. For tonight, low pressure tracking eastward just off the Arctic coast. That'll, on the back side of that, you can see tighter gradients, blowing snow in the increased winter weather advisories western Arctic coast, down into the northwest interior with cold front and lowering snowfall levels coming into south central Alaska, but not too heavy on the precipitation. Rain and snow showers possible for the Panhandle, and some snow showers pretty widespread over the central Bering Sea, but dry for the eastern central Aleutians and Bristol Bay. High pressure makes for colder and drier conditions with light winds tomorrow over the southwest interior, and a quieter weather pattern except up along the Arctic coast and the northwest interior. And then dry and colder over interior Alaska on Wednesday. Big storm comes into the Aleutians with a front pushing into the central Aleutians late in the afternoon.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.